Welcome to this explainer. Right out of the gate, we're diving into a genuinely gripping narrative from our source material. We are going to explore a story of extraordinary human resilience, profound courage, and the ultimate sacrifice, all set against the incredibly harrowing backdrop of the Vietnam War. Today, we're focusing on the life of Betty Ann Olsen. And honestly, this isn't just some dry historical account. It's a deep dive into the absolute limits of human endurance and the sheer power of conviction when you're faced with unimaginable danger. Let's get right into it.
So picture this. It's January 30th, 1968. The Vietnam War is raging, and this specific date, well, it marks the terrifying eruption of the Tet Offensive. According to the text, it was during this massive military campaign that communist forces directly attacked the mission station at Ban Me Thuot, which we know today as Ban Me Thuot. The danger was sudden, it was absolute, and it was completely overwhelming. And Betty Ann Olsen, who was stationed right there at the mission, found herself captured and suddenly thrust into a life-or-death situation as a prisoner of war.
Now, seeing how she ended up as a captive in such a deadly conflict immediately brings up a vital question. Who exactly was Betty Ann Olsen? I mean, how did an American woman end up right in the crosshairs of the Vietnam War? And what drove her to place herself in that kind of perilous danger in the first place? To truly understand the gravity of her capture, we need to pivot away from the stakes of 1968 and take a quick flashback. We really need to look at who she was at her core long before the war completely surrounded her.
Which brings us to Section 1, a calling to serve.
Born on May 22, 1940, in Montclair, Betty Ann grew up in a Christian family that profoundly shaped who she'd become. From a very early age, her defining characteristics were a gentle spirit and this deep, deep desire to serve others rather than, just seeking out her own comfort. She sensed early on that she was called to missionary service, but she didn't just have good intentions. Actually, she actively and rigorously equipped herself to serve where the need was absolutely greatest. How? Well, first, she engaged in intense Bible study to ground her spiritual convictions. Second, and this is highly crucial, she focused on learning practical cross-cultural skills. This wasn't just theory, right? This was about knowing how to actually live and function in a completely different part of the world. And third, she underwent formal training through the Christian and Missionary Alliance after finishing her education. So her preparation was this perfect blend of spiritual readiness and highly practical, real-world skill building.
Now for Section 2, Mission to the Bru People. Let's look at her deployment to South Vietnam.
Okay, let's dive into this specific deployment. In the mid-1960s, all of Betty's extensive preparation finally became a reality when she traveled to South Vietnam. She was specifically assigned to live and work among the Bru people, an ethnic minority living in these remote mountainous regions right near the border with Laos. And her daily work in this incredibly challenging environment? It was hands-on and deeply compassionate. Sure, she was out there sharing Bible stories, but she was also constantly visiting families, assisting with the local children's education, encouraging local believers, and really rolling up her sleeves to help with broad community development. The sources make it super clear that because of this daily, humble, and genuine concern for their well-being, Betty became deeply, deeply loved by the community she served. She wasn't just a visitor, she was an integral, caring part of their everyday lives. But there was a massive storm brewing around her. On one side, you have the peaceful, compassionate nature of her community-building humanitarian work. But on the other, you've got the factual, violent reality of the intensifying Vietnam War. It's like two completely different worlds colliding. As the geopolitical conflict escalated, the danger to everyone in the region, missionaries absolutely included, skyrocketed. The situation was deteriorating rapidly, and she actually began receiving repeated warnings to evacuate the area for her own safety.
So, the crucial point we have to ask is, why did she stay? Why ignore the warnings to leave? Well, Betty believed that, quote, the love of Christ should be demonstrated most clearly during times of suffering. She operated on this deep, unshakable conviction that missionaries shouldn't just pack up and flee when things get tough. She believed in remaining faithful to the people she loved, even when the circumstances became incredibly dangerous. Her dedication absolutely wasn't conditional on her safety. It was absolute.
Moving into Section 3, the ultimate sacrifice, let's talk about her capture in 1968.
Let's walk through the grueling timeline of her captivity. This acts as the tragic yet somehow inevitable climax of her steadfast decision to remain at her post. Following her capture on January 30th, alongside several other missionaries, she endured what can only be described as absolute hell on earth. Over the following months, she was forced to march through incredibly difficult, harsh jungle terrain. The conditions of her imprisonment were just brutal. She suffered from severe illness, malnutrition, and profound exhaustion. Yet, even in the midst of this horrific ordeal, the sources report that she continually trusted God and, amazingly, somehow found the strength to encourage her fellow captives. Tragically, though, her physical body couldn't hold out forever, and her health deteriorated completely. On July 13, 1968, Betty Ann Olsen died while still being held as a prisoner of war.
And this is a number that really hits hard. 28. Betty Ann Olsen was only 28 years old when she died in that jungle. Her life was cut incredibly short, ending so very far away from her home in Montclair. I think it emphasizes the profound weight of her sacrifice. A young woman, right in the prime of her life, giving up decades of her future because she simply refused to abandon the people she felt called to serve.
Which brings us to Section 4, a lasting legacy.
You see, her death was not the end of her story. Far from it. Her steadfast witness, her cheerful and humble spirit, even in captivity, and her ultimate sacrifice made a massive impact. In fact, she became one of the best-known Protestant missionary martyrs of the entire Vietnam War. The source material points to a specific verse from the Gospel of Matthew. "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me." And they note that this perfectly encapsulates Betty's life. She quite literally denied herself the comfort and safety of an American life, took up her cross, and followed her calling all the way to a jungle prison camp. She chose faithfulness over comfort in the most literal sense imaginable.
Distilling the core takeaways from the source material, Betty's story reminds believers globally that a calling is worth following even when it involves immense hardship. It teaches us that true love for others often requires steep personal sacrifice. It shows that faithfulness is measured by obedience and perseverance, not by safety and not by visible success. As she so strongly believed, the gospel shines most brightly in difficult circumstances, and her story continues to challenge and inspire pastors, missionaries, and Christians around the world to serve with that exact same unwavering trust today.
Which leaves us with a deeply provocative final question. Would you choose faithfulness over safety when it costs absolutely everything? Betty Ann Olsen answered that question with her life. Her unwavering faith and her love for the people of Vietnam stand as a monumental testament to human courage. I really want you to take a moment and deeply reflect on what it means to hold a conviction so strongly that you'd risk it all. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer on an incredibly unforgettable life.